Hi everyone, this is Professor Hall, and today we are talking about avoiding plagiarism, making sure your work is your own. So I created this presentation because a lot of my students have asked me about how to avoid plagiarism because they're worried that they're going to accidentally plagiarize. So in this presentation, we're going to cover a few things: the definition of plagiarism, what it is, 6 reasons people might plagiarize, citation and attribution, the difference between common knowledge and researched information, the 3 types of plagiarism, and then 7 tips on how to avoid them, which we'll be talking about kind of as we go as well. So how to get rid of that little devil on your shoulder. Go ahead and use it. Nobody will know. All right, let's get started. What is plagiarism? I love this picture because it kind of explains everything without me saying anything more. But plagiarism is the use of someone else's words, ideas, data, or product without appropriate citation or acknowledgement. And depending on what school you go to, some schools have just this as a definition of plagiarism, and they won't include things like cheating. They'll have that in kind of a different section of, the student handbook or an academic code, the rules that you have to abide by when you go to their school. But it can include a few other things. One of them is called collusion. Collusion is when you work together with someone else to turn something in. So, for example, I had a student who was accused of plagiarism, and they said, I didn't plagiarize, I wrote it with my mom. That would be collusion. Your mom helped you to write your paper. Or I've had 2 students who were dating turn in a paper and put both their names at the top. That would also not be allowed. Another part of the definition can include fabrication. Fabrication means making information up. Now, this sometimes happens at higher levels at research universities where they've supposedly done a study and maybe somebody's made up some information. But it can happen in regular college composition classes as well. You forgot where you cited something, so you make up the citation. Or you can't remember the author's name, and you think it might be like Mr. Smith, and so you put that name in when that's really not the case. Or you make up some information to kind of puff up your paper a little bit. So, you could look up the your school's handbook and find out the rules, but to be honest, if you're really trying not to plagiarize, that probably isn't going to matter as much. It's just something to be aware of. So why do people plagiarize? There's a couple of reasons that people might plagiarize on purpose. This is a great illustration of the first one, which is procrastination. College is a little bit difficult for people coming out of high school because there's no structure and they can do things on their own time a lot of the times, other than maybe going to class, unless you have online classes where you're going or doing the work on your own time. So sometimes people have a tendency to procrastinate. There's also, and I didn't include this here, but I should have, even if you are out of high school, if you have or you're an adult and you have a job and kids, you're an older adult, you're working, so I have some students who are working 2 or 3 jobs and they have kids and they have family responsibilities. So sometimes it's a time management issue. You haven't been putting things off, but you don't really know how to manage your time. There are always resources at a college to help you with that. Academic counselors or advisors or academic coaches. Sometimes even your teacher can give you some good time management tips. And there's a lot of time management advice here on YouTube, so you can look for that as well. Confusion about the assignment or difficulty understanding the material. Sometimes that can happen as well if you really don't understand what you're reading, or you understood the reading but the teacher's asking you to do something you're not really sure. Sometimes that can lead to frustration, and then people end up plagiarizing. A misunderstanding of common knowledge and researched information. Usually this happens accidentally. So we're going to talk about these 2 things and how to know when you need to use a citation, when you need to show where your research is from. Problems summarizing and paraphrasing. So I have other videos on summarizing and paraphrasing, and if you have gotten in trouble with this, you can definitely watch those for more help. But basically what happens here is that a student is trying to put things in their own words and uses too much of the author's original language. So it is a type of plagiarism you can get in trouble for, and it's important that you don't do that. And then the last one is problems with citations. So not having the right format for a citation. Again, there's a lot of help out there. You can look up how to do APA or MLA or Chicago or whatever format your teacher has asked you for. So we'll talk about how to avoid all of those things in a little bit. But first, what is a citation? Well, I've said that word about 6 times now, so if you don't know, you're probably pretty confused. But this is an example of a paraphrase with a citation after it. You notice nothing is in quotes, but it doesn't matter because even though the person didn't use the author's words, they did use the author's ideas. So they have this paraphrase here about Michelangelo, and then the author's last name and the page number, and that's a citation. A citation occurs after a quote, a summary, or a paraphrase, again, showing somebody's words or ideas. It notes that the information is from someone other than you. APA citations, that's a common form. It stands for American Psychological Association, and those use the author, the year, and the page number, or a paragraph number if the information's from online and there aren't any pages. So the author's last name, the year, and then the page or paragraph number. MLA citations, that stands for Modern Language Association, they don't care about the year as much because they're looking at who wrote the work that you're citing. So they use just the author and the page, or just the author if there aren't any page numbers available. Again, if you have like a website or a PDF. In-text citations match up with entries in your bibliography or works cited page. So I would expect from this up here that we have Revolt 100, and Revolt is an entry on my works cited page. So it would say Revolt, comma, and then whatever his first name is, John, and then the title, I don't know, Michelangelo and art, and then other information like the year, the number of pages, those kind of things. And again, there's a lot of help for how to format works cited entries or bibliography entries correctly. We're not going to talk about that now, but just know that you need the citations in the text of your paper. That's why they're called in-text citations. And then you should also show the full information of who wrote it and where you found it at the end of your essay. So what is attribution? Well, attribution is a tiny bit different. Attribution means that in a sentence, before presenting the researched information, you attribute or accredit the information to someone, or you have an introduction to the information to show where it is from. So in other words, you're telling your reader where that information comes from or who wrote it. For example, the author said XYZ, that just stands in for the quote, or according to a recent study from State University, comma, and then that quotation or the summary or the paraphrase. You could include things like the author's name, their credentials. Credentials are basically the things that give them the expertise to write. So where they went to school, other things they wrote, their job. So for example, instead of just the author said, comma, I might attribute this quote to a particular author. So psychologist and researcher John Smith stated, comma, and then have that quotation. So here's an example. This is an APA example. We have the introduction here. They're calling this a narrative in-text citation, but it's essentially what I just said. It's that attribution piece. Stein studied whether the early onset of Alzheimer's disease, and then so forth. And then it has the citation here. Then we have another study found similar data. It's introducing the evidence, giving that attribution. And then we have this citation. Here there are two authors. It was from 2014, and then we have the page, right? So if I wanted more attribution, I could say another study entitled Alzheimer's disease and youth symptoms. I could have the name of the study in there if I wanted for additional attribution. Or similarly with Stein, I could say expert in Alzheimer's research, Richard Stein, who set up the Foundation for Alzheimer's Disease, studied whether, and then have that. So I could include things like the title, I could include their credentials, but the nice thing about attribution is it helps your paper to be a little bit more smooth and readable as well. So it's not just dropping that researched information in there. So what is common knowledge? A lot of times when I talk about how to cite things, then people start worrying like, well, I know such and such a fact, but do I have to cite that? It sort of depends. Common knowledge refers to any fact that is generally known by educated adults. You don't need to cite these facts. The facts could be looked up or verified in multiple sources, but as a writer, you know these things because of your knowledge and experience. They come from you. They don't have to be looked up to be verified. So, for example, the Great Wall of China is one of the largest structures in the world. That would be common knowledge, right? The name of the specific emperor who helped to build the Great Wall of China, or how many bricks the wall has in it, or how many miles it stretches, those things would be researched information. You probably wouldn't happen to know them just from your knowledge and experience. So here are some examples. The moon orbits the Earth, common knowledge. Researched information, how many meters per second the moon travels. George Washington was the first president. Peyton Randolph of Virginia served as the first president of the Continental Congress in 1774. Now, if you're a history buff, you might know that information, but for the most part, that's going to be something that is researched. The attack on Pearl Harbor launched the U.S. into World War II. The number of Americans killed in the attack and the number wounded, that's data from a source, right? So that is basically the difference between common knowledge and researched information. Specific data, specific facts, specific words from an expert, those kind of things would need to be cited. If you ever have a question, you can always ask your teacher as well. So here's an example of a paragraph about John F. Kennedy. I numbered the sentences just so you can kind of see. The year he was killed, the fact that the assassination has been controversial, some people blamed Castro. You might know those things from your own knowledge. What Castro exactly said about the assassination, what he claimed 50 years later, here we have a quote and two paraphrases. So this is a paragraph from a student who let me use it for this presentation. And initially they didn't have any citations in there. And I was like, look, the first three sentences, you know, just from your experience, but the last three, we have a quote and two paraphrases. So you need the citations in there. So here is the revision with proper citations. So the first three, no citations needed. And then the next two, he kind of combined some of the information, the quote, and then the two paraphrases are there from pages 10 to 12. And then this is the corresponding entry in the works cited page. But again, author's last name, page number. That's it. That's all that was needed. Nothing else was needed there. A lot of times people put the whole URL or they'll put the title and the author. So just make sure you check those and keep it simple. So what are the three types of plagiarism now that we've gone through common knowledge and why people plagiarize and all of those things? The first is intentional. And I think the biggest thing for intentional plagiarism is don't copy and paste from a website, don't buy a paper, don't get someone else to write the paper or part of the paper for you. Those are pretty easy to avoid, especially if you can not procrastinate. And if you have a question about the material, just get a tutor or talk to your teacher and ask questions and get extra help. Unintentional is basically the accidental plagiarism that we've been talking about. Reading research and forgetting to cite it, not having properly formatted citations, not using your own words in a paraphrase or summary, and sometimes people change the words in a quote accidentally. So make sure if you're quoting someone's exact words that you double check what they have to say. And then there is also self-plagiarism. And I actually know a professor from my college days when I was in college who was fired for plagiarizing from himself. Reusing research data or papers you have done in the past and presenting the old work as completely new or original. You can get in trouble for doing this at college as well. And I've known a couple students who have missed points or who have failed a class because they took the class before and they didn't check with their teacher if it was all right to turn in a certain paper, or they did a similar assignment in high school and they just tried to turn that in. So you're not allowed to use things that you've done in the past because you are trying to show that you have learned something new. So, tips for avoiding plagiarism. I've said a lot of these already. Don't procrastinate. Get help from your teacher or a tutor if you are struggling. Usually at college, you'll have a writing center. They'll have a tutoring center. I know at our school we do. They have in-person appointments. They have online appointments. So get help. Save your sources. If you're writing a research paper, I've noticed a lot of times people will not save their sources. They won't copy and paste the links, or they copy and paste them incorrectly, or they don't print them out. So make sure you save your sources so you can go back later and find out exactly what page something was on. Quote exact words. Summarize and paraphrase using your own words. So it's same idea, but your words. Cite as you write. This is the biggest thing I can tell you. Many times I have had students get in trouble for accidentally plagiarizing because they write their paper with research next to them or on the computer in front of them, and then they didn't save their research, they didn't cite while they were writing, and they have no idea what's from them, what's from a source, which sources things are from. So put in the citations while you're writing. Do not wait and then go back. That's my number one tip besides getting a tutor and not procrastinating. Cite while you write. The seventh tip, bonus tip, this is a plagiarism checker by Grammarly that's free. There are other plagiarism checkers online. You can always run your paper through a plagiarism checker if you're not sure. It'll show you similarities to things online, so those paraphrases and summaries. If you have something like Turnitin at your school or Safe Assign, your teacher will be looking at your work through a plagiarism checker. Almost every college has them. So run it through yourself before you turn it in and make sure that you've taken care of any problems before it's too late. So remember, the one thing that you have that nobody else has is you. Your voice, your mind, your story, your vision. The brilliant Neil Gaiman. Intentional plagiarism can be easily stopped by avoiding procrastination. You don't want to do it on purpose. Get help if you need it. If you're worried about unintentional or accidental plagiarism, you can review how to format citations, cite any researched information while you write, and use citations not just after quotes, but after paraphrases and summaries as well. So that's it. I hope that this was helpful, and I hope that it helped allay any fears that you might do things accidentally. As always, if you have questions and you're in my class, you can just ask or you can put questions in the comments. Thanks, everybody.